There's a big fuss going on over genetically modified food and whether or not genetically modified foods should be labeled in stores. Why is that exactly? What even is the purpose of genetically modified food? Well, genetic modifications to food enhance taste, durability, or convenience of growth, so they can be modified in different ways. They are engineered to contain one or more genes not originally in its genome. Altering one gene can change one or more characteristic of the whole organism. Genetically modified foods can be put on the market without being tested for potential allergens. And as you know, genetically modified foods do not have to be labeled in the US. So, we eat genetically modified foods daily without even knowing it. The question is, are genetically modified organisms harmful to human health, to livestock, to the environment? This is what the great controversy of genetically modified organisms is all about. The idea that GMOs damage animals, plants, soil, and most of all, humanity. First off, there are a couple different techniques to genetically modify an organism. The most common way in which we think of is through bacterial and viral carriers. Here, bacteria and viruses are used as carriers of DNA fragments that contain the desired trait. That DNA then invades their host DNA, and the new pieces are spliced in, cutting and pasting the DNA of one organism into another. Other forms are calcium phosphate precipitation, biolistics, and gene silencing, where a gene isn't added but rather one is removed. In other words, the trait is silenced. Now, some common genetically modified foods are tomatoes, where they are made to have a longer shelf life and so that they won't freeze during cold periods of growth. And strawberries are another one, where they grow year-long instead of only seasonal. Tobacco, where it's modified to contain less nicotine. However, the most popular forms are Monsanto corn and soy seeds. Monsanto produces 90% of global transgenic crops, producing both genetically modified crops and Roundup. Since their herbicide, called Roundup, is made to kill a huge range of weeds and plants, it also kills the corn and soy along with it. Because of this, the seeds were created to withstand the Roundup. This is appealing to farmers because these crops can withstand harsh conditions such as cold, heat, drought, disease, and it saves farmers a huge cost of losing crops due to disease and unexpected environmental conditions and the herbicide. All of this decreases expenses for a farmer and could potentially make a difference in populations struggling with hunger, since there are 854 million people across the world in this situation. It sounds good, right? The whole idea of genetically engineered foods was supposed to be a great and beneficial solution. It's not like a group of scientists were sitting around and evilly tapping their fingertips together, trying to find a way to destroy humanity. But their genius idea didn't work out so well. Scenario number 1.
Joe is a farmer in India. Joe decides to plant Monsanto's genetically engineered corn seeds because of all the wonderful benefits he heard. But something happens. His crop won't produce every year to make the next harvest. So Joe has to keep buying more seeds. Now Joe and his family are in extreme debt due to their failing harvest. Joe becomes so upset that he commits suicide, leaving his family in economic ruin.
Whoa, that was a little dramatic. But stuff like that has actually happened in India. Failing harvest and inflated prices have bankrupt these farmers who have put everything into their genetically modified corn. These farmers then go and drink the very same chemicals that they use to kill the weeds for their crops and to kill them themselves. Farmer suicide is considered one of the largest means of suicide, since 60% of the population in India is directly or indirectly reliant on agriculture, which is currently 1.1 billion people. And next, we come to scenario number 2.
Superbugs! Bill is a farmer who grows genetically engineered crops and sprays them with Monsanto's Roundup. All the weeds and bugs threatening the wellness of his crops die, from the powerful chemical, except for a few remaining weeds and bugs that undergo mutations. Like this worm here. This worm pairs up with his surviving worm girlfriend, and they make worm babies that are genetically immune to the powerful chemicals of Roundup. Now when Bill goes to spray Roundup on his genetically engineered crops, he notices that not all the weeds and bugs are dying like they're supposed to. Oh no!
So pests and weeds surviving powerful chemicals because of mutations give rise to a chemical-resistant generation of offspring, which continue to produce so on and so forth. This nullifies the whole point of even having genetically modified crops in the first place, as we see the evolution of superbugs and superweeds due to immunity through mutations. Next we come to Roundup's unexpected pollution. GMOs have not reduced the need for chemical inputs like they thought it would. Rather, they have expanded it. Roundup persists in soils, waterways, and the like, containing and contaminating water supplies. Roundup, Bt bacteria, and other GMO byproducts degrade soils of vital minerals and beneficial bacteria. It does not biodegrade, but continues accumulating in our environment without restraint, perpetually altering soil composition and contaminating natural resources. Roundup is a major source of environmental pollution. Which brings us to scenario number 3.
Benny is a bee. Benny goes about every day from flower to flower and plant to plant, transferring pollens and carrying some back to his hive. Benny cruises through Joe the farmer's genetically modified field, as well as Henry the farmer's organic field, mixing the two pollens together and contaminating the organic field. Then Benny soon notices that all his friends are randomly dying. Soon Benny too feels under the weather, and his body is unable to handle the altered DNA and chemicals of genetically engineered crops. Benny dies along with many other pollinators.
Tragic! Traces of genetically modified organisms have been found in soils not even sprayed, because the plants have been visited by the bees that are actively transferring the contaminated pollen from Roundup corn crops. The pollinators, such as bees, butterflies, and bats, are unable to handle the modifications and die. With the bees dying, 1/3 or more of the food supply will be destroyed. Bees do a lot for us. We just don't even realize it. This will lead to catastrophic destruction of the food supply and affects the entire food chain. The food supply is heading towards irreversible destruction. Okay. Now we know what happens to pollinators in reaction to GMOs, but what about other animals? GMOs are processed far differently than natural foods are by mammals when they eat them, digest them. After feeding rats Monsanto genetically modified corn, 50% of the males and 70% of the females died. Premature deaths. Those that drank small amounts of Roundup, like the amounts that would be found in water that seeps into water, resulted in massive tumors, including 80% of females containing mammary tumors. Not a good place for a tumor. My mom's been into genetically modified food for a while. So every time we go to a Mexican restaurant, we bring our own chips. They're like genetically modified free chips. Who brings their own food to a restaurant? Whatever. We just went along with it. We're like, okay, Mom, whatever you say, whatever makes you happy. And I didn't really care about genetically modified food. I was like, whatever. I didn't really know anything about it. I just knew that my mom was freaking out about it. And I assumed she was probably right too. So I just went along with it. But after seeing this horrifying rat picture of their tumors, I am never eating normal tortilla chips again. Ever. Only GMO free. The rats were fed the same corn that we eat. It's not like it was some weird genetically modified corn thing and oh, I'm not eating that. No, it's the same corn. The same corn that caused these tumors is the same corn in our everyday cereals, corn tortillas, and chips. The rats also suffered severe organ, liver, and kidney damage. Rats that gave birth to babies had smaller babies, and half of them died. They have also noticed that pigs and cows fed genetically modified diets are becoming sterile. So if all this is happening to animals, why is it not happening to humans? Well, it is. We just don't really realize it. Organ disruption, sterility, impotence, and obesity are all causes of genetically modified diets. Genes inserted into GMOs can be damaged or rearranged, creating proteins that trigger allergies or promote diseases. And we're eating that. Bt toxins reach bloodstreams of 93% of women and 80% of unborn babies. Unborn babies. Through eating things like meat, milk, and eggs that the livestock are fed, like when they eat genetically modified corn. So like we're getting it from eating animals that eat it. So it's like they're just passing it on. So basically we're turning our bacteria in our intestines into pesticide factories. Great! That's exactly what we want. So the genetic material from genetically modified organisms transfer into the DNA of living bacteria where it produces indefinitely. Indefinitely. Even after we stop eating genetically modified organisms, the proteins continue to produce inside of us. Yeah. Now, so far, I've only been talking about genetically modified crops that we eat. But what about animals? Do they genetically modified animals that we eat too? Recently, scientists have been testing out genetically modifying animals such as salmon. They inject a growth hormone gene into the fertilized eggs to produce fast-growing salmon, so that the salmon grow 2 to 4 times faster than other farm salmon. So if scientists have gone from plants and now starting to animals, what's going to stop them from going to the next big thing? Humans. Genetic experiments have actually been done on human embryos already. Scientists are allowed to alter the genetic blueprint of an embryo up to 2 weeks old. After 14 days, the embryos are destroyed so that there aren't any genetically modified babies, because right now they don't want that. At the time the embryo is destroyed, it's a bundle of 100 cells, so it's not yet a baby, but I still think it's a life. It's a life that God has created that you just destroy, even if it's not a baby yet. It's not implanted in the womb because right now that's currently illegal and immoral. Right now the scientists use the embryos to learn about inherited disorders, but there's an argument that other techniques already exist helping couples with defective genes. So soon it will be difficult to preserve the morality of all this once scientists can prove the possibilities of curing diseases through the embryos, and they'll just want to go the next step further. So far, the techniques of genetically modifying a human are unsafe and can cause mutations, but ideally they would be able to improve a child's character or appearance, which could lead to an era of eugenics where couples can create their own children as perfect as possible. This is a dangerous direction that we're heading in. Think about all the fuss caused over having genetically modified food and labeling it. Can you imagine the fuss over having genetically modified babies, humans? There are so many verses in the Bible that talk about how God created us with his very own hands according to his original and perfect plan.
Like Jeremiah 1:5 says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." Psalm 119:73 says, "Your hands made me and formed me." And Ephesians 2:10, "For we are his workmanship." And Psalm 139:13, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb." In Psalm 139:14, "I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it full well."
We are made in the image of God, not through a group of scientists or an idea that our parents have. Our design comes from him. When we try to diminish the power of God and take on his role as almighty creator of all things, bad things start to happen, as we saw with all the problems with GMOs right now. It's like God shaking his head and saying, "This is what happens when you try to be me." We aren't meant to have that much power. Obviously, because right when we think we're so genius, problems start to happen.
Now, I'm pretty sure this picture is meant for abortion, but it works well for genetically modified babies as well.
It shouldn't be our choice of whether or not we can decide what hair color or eyes our baby has, or whether our kid is athletic like daddy or organized like mommy. According to Psalm 139:14, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Why change that? Why take what miracle God has already done and say, sorry, it's not good enough. I want it how I want it. So to sum it all up, genetically modified organisms started as a good thing, but went terribly wrong. Despite that, scientists continue to pursue further into the realm of genetically modified organisms, gradually shooing away any sense of morality. And that's what all the genetically modified fuss is about.